on one hand, we don't want to debate for too long Donald Trump's nonsensical statements at NABJ, but there's some fundamental misunderstanding that either he has or he's deliberately trying to sow about the tens of millions of people in this country who have multiple ethnic or racial identities.
He definitely has. And he talked about Kamala Harris, the vice president, in terms of, is she really Black? And as long as I have known of Vice President Harris, even during her time as district attorney, as a senator, as vice president, obviously, she has always proudly talked about being Indian American and African American. So his attempt to try and divide the Democratic Party was not successful, and it looks like it's backfiring on him. On top of that...
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I'm not sure it's going to land with anyone, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say, it's interesting because when he agreed to take the stage at the National Association of Black Journalists, he was not there to try and convince the African-American community or African-American journalists to support him or why they should vote for him. He was there as a con man, as a performer to sow chaos. He was talking over them. He wouldn't answer questions, and he was just trying to divide because Kamala Harris is the most qualified person to be President Biden's successor because of her record, because of her serving with him for 3.5 years during tumultuous times, both here at home and abroad. So he has nothing. So he's now just trying to drag up anything to see if it sticks. And it's not sticking.
I want to read something that you wrote in an op-ed called The Black and Asian Experience. You wrote this for the Northwest Asian Weekly after these comments. You write, mixed race leaders can bring coalitions together, often among disparate groups. It's how we've had to navigate the world our entire lives. People ask me if I consider myself more Black or Korean. Why must I choose? I benefit from the best of both worlds, what we've overcome and what we've contributed to this nation. I come from enslaved people who built this country, fought for it, and were denied basic rights. I come from people who came to America not knowing the language or customs and were treated like outsiders who don't belong here. You clearly painted this as a strength, an advantage, which I think that's how most Americans see this. Tell me a little bit more about this, because even Republicans are outraged at what happened the other day.
So remember, when Vice President Harris was announced as the person that President Biden supports, the attack started immediately. First, they tried to say she was a failed border czar, when in fact, people coming over the southern border has decreased by 50% through President Biden's executive order. And there is a bill sitting in the Senate, a bipartisan bill to address the border that Donald Trump demanded not come to the floor. So if anyone's going to have responsibility, it lands solely with Donald Trump. When I think about the statement that I wrote, though, I think about the fact that for us in the Democratic Party, we view our identity as an asset. And think about the enthusiasm, the volunteers signing up, the first-time donor to this campaign. People are energized and excited and ready to get to work for Vice President Harris. And that means that things aren't looking so good for Mr. Trump. So instead of trying to come up with something policy-related, because he has nothing, he's trying to attack her identity. So to his base, her identity is something that is a liability. To us, it is an asset. And it's obvious that the Black community is energized, the Asian American community is energized, and a lot of people who are kind of just sleepwalking through the election are now ready to get to work to make her the next president of the United States.
Let's talk about doing that instead of talking about policy. At least you'd think in the House maybe there's some policy, but there's just been a tweet from CBS News congressional reporter Scott MacFarlane about some upcoming bills on the Republican side of the House, all having to do with Trump. Let me just list some of these to you. Ordering the U.S. Mint to print $500 bills with Donald Trump's portrait on them, renaming Dulles Airport for Donald Trump, renaming U.S. coastal waters for Donald Trump, expunging his impeachments, formally declaring he didn't engage in insurrection, and declaring Donald Trump was politically persecuted. I don't know if that doubles for policy in your world, but doesn't in mine.
No, it doesn't. So instead of coming up with these ridiculous ways to honor Donald Trump, what they need to do is focus on getting a farm bill passed. Yep. What we need to do is focus on these appropriations bills. What we need to do is work on avoiding a government shutdown in September. What they need to do is come up with a suggestion of how we're going to try and reduce costs for families. They have nothing at all to run on. And this is why they're engaging in these games and this ridiculous behavior, because Democrats are there to govern and to do the people's work. They are doing the opposite. And this is really in line with Trump's Project 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an attempt to dismantle government, to have loyalty to Trump, and to give this man far too much power. And this is why we have to win in November.
It's actually a central tenet of Project 2025, the idea of getting experts out of government and bringing loyalists in. This very much seems like sort of countries you read about, you know, where there's an overthrow and then the streets are renamed and the schools are renamed. And this is not,
Right.
This is exactly what Project 2025 has in mind.
Exactly. So this is just, you know, for all of Trump's denial about Project 2025,
Yeah.
or for extreme elements of the GOP saying that's not us, we have nothing to do with it, they are using the playbook to the T. And so this demonstrates what can happen if Trump is elected. Again, we have momentum, but as Democrats, we can never take anything for granted. This is going to be a tough race, and this is why we have to show up. 80 million people did not vote in the 2020 election. So we need to show up.